The corrections. Part 1. The accident that shouldn't have happened. The boiler room at Larkspur Falls High School was supposed to be mundane. Old, creaking, smelling faintly of rust and coal dust. For decades, it had roared and hissed under the care of men like Walter Hemsley, the night janitor who had grown gray and slow among the pipes. But tonight, that ordinary room became lethal. When the morning shift found him, his body was folded grotesquely against the brick wall, skin blistered, lungs blackened by scalding steam. The pressure gauge on boiler number 3 had been pinned deep into the red zone, a twisted needle, as if it had tried, and failed, to escape the dial. By dawn, the town's collective voice had already settled on a single word: accident. Accidents were familiar here. Larkspur Falls was built on shortcuts and compromise. Rusted valves ignored, cracked tiles patched with tape, men too weary or too poor to demand better. The local paper ran the headline, "Tragic Boiler Malfunction Claims Life," and parents shook their heads at the news. City officials promised inspections, engineers wrote reports. No one asked how a boiler that had passed inspection 2 weeks prior could suddenly become a killing chamber. No one except Rowan Pike. Rowan stood in the corner of the room that morning, clipboard tucked under his arm. 36, thin to the point of appearing unfinished, with wire frame glasses that caught the fluorescent glare, he examined the pipes with a precision honed over years of municipal service and military engineering. He was quiet, and his silence often unsettled those around him. He had come to document the failure, though in truth, he already understood it. The valve assembly had been replaced recently, not with cheap parts, not with worn equipment, but with an industrial regulator rated far above the boiler's normal capacity. Flawless installation. Too flawless. Someone had recalibrated the relief system to delay the pressure release by exactly 45 seconds. The difference between a harmless venting and a sealed chamber of lethal heat. Rowan wrote nothing. He noted metal fatigue and possible corrosion on his form, signed it neatly, and left. As he stepped into the cold morning, he glanced back, almost reverently, at the boiler that had carried out his silent work. 2 days later, he stopped at a dimly lit garage off Route 23. The neon sign flickered against cracked paint. Inside, Esteban Stan Calder was finishing a cigarette, grease-stained hands resting on the hood of a late-model pickup. Stan was larger, broader than Rowan, charismatic, with a face that seemed capable of expressing everything while revealing nothing. His father had come from Havana, his mother from New Jersey. From them, he had inherited charm, patience, and a natural ease in blending into small towns like this one. "You saw it," Stan said, voice low but confident. "Yes," Rowan replied. "They'll call it mechanical failure. They always do." They did not speak of Walter Hemsley. The janitor had been a variable, not a target. The real target was Eldon Merrick, the school district contractor who had skimmed funds meant for maintenance, leaving the boiler system dangerously neglected. Complaints had gone ignored, audits filed and vanished. Finally, the system itself had delivered judgment. "What about the timing?" Stan asked. "Perfect. Shift change. One man in the room. No witnesses," Rowan said. Stan crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, grinding it flat. "Good." Neither man felt joy, at least, not the kind most people expected from a successful crime. Instead, there was relief, cold and methodical. Rowan had studied airflow and pressure thresholds for weeks. Stan had provided logistical support, ensuring nothing interfered with the plan. That night, Rowan sat at his kitchen table, spread maps of the school's boiler system, notes, and schematics. Outside, the wind rustled through the aluminum siding of neighboring houses, and the town slept, oblivious. "One defect corrected," Stan said finally. "System still broken," Rowan replied. His glasses reflected the dim lamp, and for the first time that day, a faint flicker of satisfaction passed over his thin face. The coroner's report arrived in the mail 2 days later. Accidental death. Boiler replacement scheduled. Merritt continued to collect contracts, unaware that his fortune had been balanced by the hidden precision of 2 men who understood systems better than anyone else in town. Rowan read the line twice. A part of him felt the strange, mechanical serenity of closure. The world saw an accident, they saw nothing. And that, Rowan knew, was exactly how it should be. The work was far from over. Part 2. Men Who Fix Things. Rowan Pike never considered himself a criminal. In his mind, he was an engineer correcting mistakes. Machines failed, people failed, systems failed, but errors could be fixed. His apartment was proof of this worldview. Walls lined with schematics, neatly stacked manuals, and notebooks filled with calculations. Each pencil mark, each note, represented control. The city outside, with its winding streets, flickering streetlights, and distant hum of trains, was a chaotic system. Yet here, within these walls, everything was measurable. Stan Calder, in contrast, embraced chaos like a dance he had learned in Havana from his father. He could step into any room, assess the personalities in it, predict movements, and leave undetected. To anyone in town, he was just the charismatic mechanic who fixed engines that no one else dared touch. To Rowan, he was indispensable. Their relationship was not friendship in the ordinary sense. There was no trust born from emotion, no affection. There was alignment, the intersection of skill sets. Rowan calculated, Stan executed. Together, they were precise, unerring. The memory of Korea haunted them both, though they rarely spoke of it. The endless lines of pipes and conduits, the pressure valves, the maps of terrain, the structural weaknesses. Rowan had learned how to predict failure. Stan had learned how to manipulate it. In the army, failure could cost a life. Here, failure meant consequences for the negligent, the corrupt, the unseen offenders whose carelessness poisoned the community. They saw themselves as correctors, not killers. Their weekly meetings followed ritualistic patterns. Rowan arrived first, carrying a briefcase of documents. Stan arrived later, usually smoking a Cuban-rolled cigarette, his face relaxed, concealing the tension that always built when plans began to take shape. They sat across from each other, spread maps and notebooks on the table, and spoke in measured tones. Their conversations rarely ventured into casual territory. They discussed pipelines, valve ratings, timing, and personnel schedules. Each potential target was evaluated for threat, opportunity, and the minimal chance of collateral damage. It was during one such meeting that they reviewed the maintenance contracts for Larkspur Falls municipal buildings. Rowan had noticed discrepancies in inspection logs, missing signatures, and the repeated failure to replace worn safety devices. "They pretend to maintain the systems," he said, tapping a finger against a highlighted note. "They don't care who gets hurt. They only care that the budget balances." Stan nodded. "We can fix it. Again." The men did not talk about morals. They did not debate justice. Their morality was technical. If a system was flawed, it could be corrected. If a person endangered others through negligence or greed, they became part of the system's failure. The solution was simple, elegant, and final. That evening, they visited a municipal warehouse under the pretense of inventory checks. Rowan examined the schematics for the water heating system at the local library, noting pressure points, relief valves, and emergency shutoffs. Outside, the wind rustled through the aluminum siding of neighboring houses, and the town slept, oblivious. "One defect corrected," Stan said finally. "System still broken," Rowan replied. His glasses reflected the dim lamp, and for the first time that day, a faint flicker of satisfaction passed over his thin face. The coroner's report arrived in the mail 2 days later. Accidental death. Boiler replacement scheduled. Merrick continued to collect contracts, unaware that his fortune had been balanced by the hidden precision of 2 men who understood systems better than anyone else in town. Rowan read the line twice. A part of him felt the strange, mechanical serenity of closure. The world saw an accident. They saw nothing. And that, Rowan knew, was exactly how it should be. The work was far from over. Stan walked the perimeter, ensuring access routes were clear, observing the guard rotations, and memorizing patrol intervals. Their movements were quiet, precise, rehearsed like the drills they had once performed in Korea. No one noticed. No one questioned. Back at their respective homes, both men went through personal rituals to separate themselves from the impending acts. Rowan meticulously cleaned his drafting tools and arranged them according to size and function, a small meditation that allowed him to visualize the sequences of events. Stan sharpened his wrenches and calibrated measuring devices, noting tolerances down to fractions of a millimeter. These were not the habits of hobbyists. They were preparation, premeditation rendered in mechanical form. Rowan's thoughts wandered, briefly, to the lives that hung in the balance. He did not feel guilt. He felt calculation. "Every correction has a cost," he murmured to himself, staring at the blueprints. The cost was acceptable, quantifiable. He imagined the heat, the steam, the small number of people in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he ran the simulations in his head. Each variable accounted for, each outcome predicted. Meanwhile, Stan's mind raced with logistics. Timing was everything. The library would be empty in precisely 37 minutes after closing. The night janitor was always predictable. He made mental notes of tools required, escape routes, and contingencies. His pulse remained steady. He enjoyed the challenge. Not the violence, not the death, but the precision, the elegance of control. By the time they reconvened, Rowan had produced detailed charts of thermal pressure tolerances. Stan had confirmed mechanical access and timing feasibility. "We go Thursday," Rowan said, voice clipped, emotionless. Stan nodded, satisfied. There was no excitement, only preparation, execution, and resolution. Larkspur Falls continued its quiet rhythm outside their apartments. Streetlights flickered. Steam hissed from manholes. The train rumbled in the distance. To the town, life remained mundane. Yet Rowan and Stan knew the truth. The system was still broken, and they were the only ones capable of correcting it. Part 3. The First Correction. Thursday arrived with a gray sky and the low hum of the town's morning train. Rowan Pike left his apartment early, carrying a canvas bag of tools and a folded set of schematics. The streets of Larkspur Falls were nearly empty. A few early commuters trudged past the cracked sidewalks, the smell of coal smoke lingering in the crisp air. He walked with a deliberate pace, each step measured. In his mind, the sequence of events for the day ran like a mechanical simulation. Time, distance, temperature, pressure, all accounted for. Nothing left to chance. Stan Calder followed shortly after, his black coat buttoned tight against the chill. He moved with a quiet confidence, scanning rooftops and alleyways as he walked. The target today was Eldon Merrick, the municipal contractor whose negligence had left the high school's boilers dangerously outdated. Merrick was meticulous in public, but careless in private. His overconfidence was a variable Rowan had studied for weeks. They arrived at the municipal maintenance yard together. Rowan laid out the schematics on the hood of a parked van. The plan was simple, if deadly precise. The steam boiler system at the library would be manipulated to fail in a way that looked accidental. A series of minor adjustments, a temporary override of the pressure valves, and the system would reach lethal thresholds within a controlled window. Rowan's calculations had accounted for every thermal expansion, every safety valve's reaction time, every possible interruption from maintenance staff. Stan checked the access points, ensuring no unexpected obstacles would interfere with their plan. By mid-morning, the library was empty. The night janitor had left early for personal errands, and the librarian had gone to a midweek training seminar. Rowan moved silently through the mechanical room, carefully adjusting the relief valves according to his precise diagrams. Each turn of the wrench, each calibration, was a step in a ritual, executed with almost religious devotion. Stan remained outside, listening for footfalls, his ears attuned to the subtle echoes of the empty hallways. 45 minutes before the scheduled failure, Rowan double-checked the valve settings. He measured the steam pressure and calculated the delayed release. Every reading was within tolerances, yet lethal. His pulse remained steady, his face expressionless. Death, in his mind, was a technical outcome, not a moral one. Stan tapped a finger against the wall, signaling that the external observation was complete. Rowan nodded. At precisely the predetermined moment, the boiler system began its accelerated cycle. Steam hissed louder. The pressure needle climbed past safety limits, and a faint vibration ran through the floor. Rowan monitored the readings, noting the precise moment when the temperature reached a fatal threshold. Somewhere in a nearby office, Merrick would have felt the heat, smelled the faint metallic tang, and had seconds to react, but the safety overrides had been carefully delayed. There was no dramatic explosion, no chaotic noise to alert others, just inevitability. 2 hours later, Rowan exited the library quietly, rolling up his schematics. Stan was waiting by the street, leaning against a parked truck. "Confirmed," Rowan said, voice low. The word carried no triumph, no joy, only procedural acknowledgement. The death had been precise, clean, and untraceable. To the world, it was an accident. To Rowan and Stan, it was a correction. By evening, the coroner's report had arrived at the municipal offices. Cause of death: carbon monoxide poisoning due to accidental mechanical failure. No mention of tampering, no hint of intervention. Rowan read the report, noting the language, the lack of suspicion. The precision was satisfying. The system had corrected itself, and the town remained oblivious. Stan, at his apartment, cleaned the tools they had used that morning. Each wrench, each gauge, each screwdriver was wiped, measured, and returned to its proper place. Next? He asked quietly. Yes, Rowan replied. He spread out a fresh set of schematics, this time for a smaller industrial plant in Fairmont, Indiana. Their methods would differ, but the logic remained the same. Identify failure, calculate correction, execute. Each death, each correction, was planned to minimize collateral damage. Their morality was exacting, their responsibility absolute. That night, Rowan lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing the pipeline schematics in his mind. Stan prepared his tools and charts, calculating travel routes, access points, and timing. Each death was a line in a ledger, each correction a testament to their precision. The world outside carried on in its familiar rhythm, oblivious to the invisible work that bent life toward Rowan and Stan's conception of balance. And somewhere, in a distant office, an investigator began to notice a pattern forming in the margins of reports, a pattern that would soon demand attention far beyond Cedarbrook. Part 4. Distance. They left Larkspur Falls before dawn, driving west toward Indiana in Stan's aging pickup. The road unwound through flat farmland and skeletal trees, the sky a dull sheet of winter gray. Distance mattered. Rowan believed it diluted suspicion, scattered patterns, forced investigators to see isolated failures instead of design. Different towns, different systems, different causes. Only the logic remained the same. Fairmont, Indiana was smaller than Larkspur Falls and poorer. The grain silo on the edge of town dominated the skyline like a concrete monument, its walls stained by decades of dust and neglect. Baxter Lowell, the owner, was well known to local officials. He donated to campaigns, sponsored church events, and ignored safety regulations with equal confidence. 3 complaints had been filed by workers over the past year. 2 were dismissed. 1 vanished. Rowan studied the silo's design from blueprints acquired through a routine inspection request. Grain dust accumulation, ventilation gaps, moisture imbalance. On paper, it was a textbook hazard. In practice, it had simply not failed yet. Rowan calculated ignition thresholds, humidity percentages, and airflow rates, filling pages with numbers that converged toward a narrow, lethal window. Stan handled access. He chatted with workers during the day, joked about engines and baseball, learned shift changes and maintenance habits. No one questioned him. They never did. By evening, he knew exactly when Lowell would be alone in the control room, and which sensors were routinely ignored because they triggered false alarms. The plan required no sabotage in the traditional sense. That was the elegance of it. Rowan made minor adjustments to the humidity controls, small enough to escape notice, precise enough to change dust behavior. Stan ensured a single spark, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, would occur at the exact moment pressure and concentration aligned. The explosion came just after sunset. It was not the roaring fireball people imagined when they heard the word explosion. It was a deep, concussive thump that rattled windows and sent a cloud of grain dust into the sky. Inside the silo, Baxter Lowell died instantly, his body crushed and burned by forces he had dismissed for years. Fire crews arrived quickly. Investigators followed. The cause was declared within hours: combustible dust ignition due to improper ventilation. Safety inspectors shook their heads. It was bound to happen, one of them said. Rowan listened from a distance, hands in his coat pockets, expression neutral. Bound to happen. That phrase mattered to him. It meant inevitability. It meant the system had failed long before they intervened. Stan watched the cleanup from a diner across the street, sipping black coffee. He felt no rush, no adrenaline, just completion. Clean, he said later that night as they drove back east. Rowan nodded. No collateral damage, no witnesses harmed. 3 workers who normally stayed late had left early due to a snowstorm. Rowan had accounted for that probability. He always did. Back in Ohio, local papers reported the silo disaster as a tragedy of neglect. No names beyond Lowell's were scrutinized, no connections drawn. Yet something subtle shifted between them after Fairmont. Confidence grew. The calculations had worked again, flawlessly. Rowan felt it in the way he planned now, faster, sharper. Stan felt it in his movements, the ease with which he navigated access points and conversations. "We can do this anywhere," Stan said one night, almost casually. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He reviewed the numbers in his head, the margins, the probabilities. "Anywhere there's a system," he replied, "which is everywhere." That realization settled heavily between them. The next file Rowan opened was thinner, quieter. No heavy machinery, no explosion, just water, pipes, and time. He traced a finger along the schematic of an aging municipal water line in a Pennsylvania town he'd never visited. Lead levels, flow rates, residential density, different method, same logic. The distance had protected them, for now. And as the country moved through another unremarkable winter, Rowan and Stan prepared to correct the system again, unaware that with every successful act, the pattern they denied was slowly becoming visible to someone else. Part 5. Waterlines. The morning in Cedar Brook, Pennsylvania, began like any other. Frost on the sidewalks, the soft whistle of the wind through chimneys, and the low murmur of factory engines starting their day. Harold Givens, the city councilman, drank his coffee by the window, unaware that his life was already being measured against calculations drawn hundreds of miles away by a pair of men who considered morality a technical variable. Rowan Pike studied the municipal water schematics while sitting alone in a rented room, tracing each junction, each pipe, each valve that fed Givens' residence. Lead concentrations, flow rates, water pressure. The calculations were subtle but deadly. One slight adjustment to the corrosion-prone junction feeding Givens Street would increase lead exposure over weeks. Small, imperceptible, cumulative. A poison hidden in plain sight. Stan Calder drove to the town quietly, blending in as the friendly mechanic who fixed everything from engines to broken faucets. He had memorized patrol patterns and delivery schedules, ensuring no worker would interfere with the subtle adjustments Rowan would later make. No alarms would trigger, no evidence would remain. The town's infrastructure, neglected and outdated, was itself the perfect accomplice. Rowan worked late into the night, calibrating the water pressure regulators and noting the precise flow delays needed to deliver a fatal dose. He imagined the outcome not in terms of cruelty, but in terms of efficiency. The town would continue unaware. Harold Givens would remain a respected public official. And yet, by the morning, his health would already begin to decline irreversibly. This was the art of their work. Invisible corrections, each one leaving the system itself as witness to the crime. Stan arrived at the appointed time and assisted with the technical checks. They never discussed morality, nor did they speak of the lives their precision had sentenced. Conversation revolved solely around measurements, thresholds, timing. Rowan always calculated every variable: distance, flow rate, expected consumption. Stan ensured access and monitored for unexpected human factors. By dawn, the adjustments were complete. The flow was uninterrupted, the pipes intact, the town unaware that the water carried danger within it. Rowan and Stan left, driving through the foggy streets, unobserved. Within a week, Given's health began to deteriorate. Doctors were puzzled. Fatigue, nausea, elevated lead levels. Chronic exposure, one reported. No one suspected foul play. To Rowan and Stan, it was a perfect correction. Quiet, controlled, surgical. For the first time, the police began whispering about patterns. One investigator noticed the deaths of Merrick, Lowell, and now Givens shared an unusual consistency. Failures linked to technical systems, improbable coincidences, victims with documented negligence or corruption, but the cases were geographically scattered, unrelated in jurisdiction, and separated by months. Each one alone could be dismissed as an accident. Together, they hinted at something. Rowan, unaware of the scrutiny, reviewed upcoming targets, tracing pipelines and access points, checking systems that were as fragile as people were careless. Stan observed the town with practiced vigilance, noting any behavior that might disrupt their controlled operations. They did not fear discovery. Not yet. Patterns existed, yes, but predicting human investigation was like predicting the rust in a pipe, calculable, eventually, if the data were complete. For now, Cedar Brook remained oblivious. The city council, the maintenance crews, even Givens himself, all unaware that their world had already been altered in a way they could neither see nor resist. That night, Rowan lay on his cot, drawing new schematics for the next correction. Stan prepared his tools and charts, calculating travel routes, access points, and timing. Each death was a line in a ledger, each correction a testament to their precision. The world outside carried on in its familiar rhythm, oblivious to the invisible work that bent life toward Rowan and Stan's conception of balance. Part 6. The File. Harold Finchley, a young technical analyst for the FBI, did not believe in coincidence. His office smelled faintly of old paper and machine oil, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing against bare walls. Weeks of reviewing municipal accident reports had begun to reveal patterns invisible to local authorities. At first, the deaths seemed isolated. A janitor in Larkspur Falls, a grain silo owner in Indiana, a city councilman in Pennsylvania. 3 accidents, 3 jurisdictions, 3 explanations. But Finchley's eye for detail saw beyond jurisdictional boundaries. Each report bore the fingerprints of a precision mind. He started by cataloging technical anomalies: boilers failing with impossible timing, humidity controls miscalibrated beyond ordinary negligence, lead exposure coinciding with exact pipe junction adjustments. Each accident had been isolated, but the variables shared a logic. Expert knowledge applied with surgical exactness. One afternoon he noticed a small, overlooked detail in Cedar Brook's municipal waterline report. The regulator used to adjust the flow to Given Street was not on the approved city inventory. The serial number matched none of the documented purchases. Finchley felt a familiar rush of clarity. He began cross-referencing equipment logs in other towns. Then the names appeared: Rowan Pike and Esteban Calder. Simple names, but their professional footprints were everywhere. Municipal engineer, industrial mechanic, frequent presence near every system that had failed. Finchley's profile emerged. Not a random killer, not a serial criminal in the conventional sense, but something methodical, more calculated. Finchley requested travel records, supplier logs, and any surplus purchases of industrial equipment. He noted patterns: trips timed with minor municipal failures, purchases that correlated with accidents, a network of mechanical knowledge distributed across multiple small towns. Each variable alone could be explained away. Together, they formed a lattice of suspicion. Meanwhile, Rowan and Stan were unaware that they were now being observed. Their routines had not changed. Their meetings remained methodical, their plans precise. Rowan continued tracing blueprints, predicting failures, calculating the next correction. Stan followed schedules, monitored access points, and verified that no unaccounted human variables interfered. Every detail, every step remained under their control. Yet the world outside was beginning to shift. Finchley presented his findings to his superiors, highlighting the untraceable precision and pattern consistency. A multi-jurisdictional task force was proposed, though local authorities remained skeptical. Too coincidental, one inspector muttered. Just an unfortunate series of accidents. But Finchley persisted. The numbers, the timelines, the technical correlations, they could not be ignored. Rowan and Stan reviewed upcoming operations that evening. Their focus remained on the systems, the failures, the predictable variables. They spoke little of the law, little of morality. The world, to them, was simply machinery, and they were its engineers. But somewhere, through offices filled with filing cabinets and flickering lights, an invisible net began to close. Part 7. The Mistake. Marion, Ohio, was a town that prided itself on routine. Streets were straight, lawns trimmed, and every evening, the local diner filled with familiar faces laughing over pie and coffee. But that winter, the quiet town became another point on the map of Rowan Pike and Stan Calder's calculated corrections. Their target this time was Victor Rains, a private contractor notorious for ignoring building codes and safety regulations. He had escaped accountability for years, surviving lawsuits and inspections with charm and bribes. For Rowan and Stan, he was a system flaw demanding correction. The plan was straightforward. Rowan studied the gas lines supplying Rain's office and workshop. He calculated the exact flow, pressure, and potential ignition sources. Stan mapped the building, memorizing guard routines, delivery schedules, and the timing of Rain's coffee breaks. Every element, every variable was accounted for. On a frigid Thursday morning, Rowan executed the adjustment to the gas regulator, a subtle modification that would eventually produce a lethal concentration in the office space. The system remained functional in appearance. No alarms tripped. Stan stayed outside, observing, noting that the janitor and delivery personnel had left early. Timing was perfect, or so they thought. By mid-afternoon, Victor Rains was overcome. The gas concentration had reached dangerous levels. He collapsed while walking through his workshop, and a small ignition, an errant spark from a welding torch, caused a brief flare. The blast was minimal, leaving smoke and minor burns. but it was enough to conceal the true cause. Emergency responders arrived, and Rains was pronounced dead at the scene. The flaw in the plan appeared almost immediately. A small piece of a regulator, one component Rowan had temporarily removed, was discovered near the workshop doorway. It did not match city inventory, nor did it match the parts reported in maintenance logs. Finchley, reviewing reports across states, immediately flagged the anomaly. A single, traceable item had survived meticulous planning, a fingerprint of intent in the mechanics. For Rowan and Stan, it was a small miscalculation. Rowan felt the cold realization that perfection was elusive. Stan, usually confident, grew tense. They had never left material evidence before. Never. Meanwhile, Finchley noticed the pattern tightening. The combination of system failures, timing, and now a physical trace suggested deliberate intervention. The pattern of accidents was no longer theoretical. It had a tangible clue. That night, Rowan and Stan sat together, silent except for the scratching of pencil on paper. New diagrams for upcoming targets were spread across the table, each annotated with contingencies, escape routes, and timing. They spoke little of the regulator, merely noting that future operations would require stricter verification. Stan lit a cigarette, the glow illuminating his sharp, calculating face. "We almost left a trail," he said quietly. Rowan adjusted his glasses. "We didn't. Just a warning. Nothing more." And yet, for the first time, the invisible net began tightening. The system they believed under their control, their world of pipes, valves, and calculated human behavior, had a variable they had not accounted for. An observer capable of predicting patterns across state lines. In Marion, life returned to normal. Streets were quiet, diners filled once more, and neighbors whispered about the mysterious death of Victor Rains. But somewhere far away, Finchley began to map the pattern fully. Rowan and Stan were about to become not just correctors of systems, but subjects under observation by someone equally methodical, someone who refused to ignore the imperfections in human engineering. Part 8. Evidence. By early spring, Rowan Pike and Stan Calder had grown bold. Their corrections were no longer isolated. The pace had increased, their methods refined. Rowan's apartment was a labyrinth of blueprints, diagrams, and meticulously annotated notes. Each sheet represented a system to be corrected, every line a calculation of life and death. Stan's workspace above the garage had become an arsenal of mechanical knowledge, tools, calibration instruments, and charts tracking timing and probability. Every move they made was calculated, predictable, and, until now, invisible. But Harold Finchley was closing the net. The anomalies he had tracked across Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania had become a pattern impossible to ignore. He requested field surveillance. 2 unmarked cars trailed Rowan's vehicle as he drove to Larkspur Falls High School to examine the municipal heating system. Stan, as always, seemed oblivious, joking with townspeople, checking engines, calibrating his instruments, and carrying his leather notebook like a casual accessory. To the casual observer, they were ordinary men. To Finchley, they were anomalies manifest in flesh. The surveillance team documented every meeting, every pause, every trip. They photographed Rowan spreading out blueprints on the hood of a pickup, noted his meticulous calculations, and tracked Stan's subtle adjustments to mechanical components during off hours. Finchley began linking individual corrections to system failures. The gas leak in Marion, the waterline poisoning in Cedarbrook, the grain silo explosion in Fairmont, and the boiler death in Larkspur Falls. Each had left no direct trace, except the regulator component from Marion, but the combination of pattern, timing, and expert intervention created a digital map in Finchley's mind. One afternoon, Finchley obtained a search warrant for Stan's garage. Inside, the investigators discovered neatly stacked schematics, calibration charts, and lists of municipal systems. Each page was annotated with dates, times, and probabilities of failure, alongside the names of individuals connected to each system, people Rowan and Stan had deemed negligent or corrupt. Among the papers, an unused valve regulator with markings matching the one found at Victor Rain's office was discovered, alongside engineering notes detailing adjustments to pressure systems, gas lines, and water flows. The sheer scale of the documentation stunned the investigators. They realized they were not dealing with a typical killer, but two men operating as engineers of death. Rowan's meticulous calculations revealed a mind that treated life and infrastructure as variables in a complex equation. Stan's notes demonstrated not just access, but coordination, manipulation, and observation of human behavior to achieve predictably fatal outcomes. Meanwhile, Rowan and Stan went about their evening as usual, unaware that the net had tightened. They reviewed upcoming targets, plotted routes, and recalculated probabilities. Their confidence had never been greater, but so had their vulnerability. Rowan sensed something in the air, but could not articulate it. "Systems are still predictable," he said, scanning schematics under the dim light. Stan, leaning back in his chair, didn't answer. He noticed subtle changes: a car parked across the street too long, the shadow of someone in the distance observing movement. He adjusted a few notes, recalibrated escape contingencies, but didn't speak them aloud. By nightfall, Finchley's team had begun to connect the dots fully. The regulator left in Marion, the precise timing, the geographical spread, and the calculated manipulations of mechanical systems all pointed to a deliberate orchestration. He compiled the evidence: schematics, travel records, lists of targets, and the surviving mechanical components. Soon, Rowan and Stan would no longer be just unknown engineers. They would be suspects under federal scrutiny. In Rowan's mind, the systems still operated with perfect logic. In Stan's mind, the town remained predictable, the schedules intact. Yet in offices miles away, the first clear map of their operations was taking shape. Finchley now possessed a framework to link the men to their corrections, and the invisible architecture of their crimes was finally visible. Part 9. Judgment. The arrest came on a gray morning in early summer. Rowan Pike left his apartment with a stack of schematics under his arm, unaware that federal agents were already watching from concealed positions across the street. Stan Calder waited at the garage, finishing a cigarette, adjusting his tools, completely oblivious, or pretending to be. Within minutes, unmarked cars blocked exits. Agents moved silently, converging on both men. Rowan barely had time to register surprise before he felt hands on his arms, a firm but professional grip guiding him toward a vehicle. Stan raised his eyes, meeting Rowan's gaze. No words were exchanged, only calculation. The interrogation rooms were cold, sterile, unyielding. Finchley observed from behind one-way glass, reviewing timelines and schematics projected onto screens. The investigators had laid out the pattern. Larkspur Falls, Fairmont, Cedarbrook, Marion, and other minor corrections. Evidence included travel records, schematics, lists of targets, and the regulator component left in Marion. Each item, innocuous alone, combined to form an airtight sequence of premeditated acts. Rowan sat calmly, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, hands folded on the table. "We corrected the systems," he said, voice flat, untroubled. The interrogators flinched at the dispassionate phrasing. Stan, on the other side of the room, merely nodded once, silent, confident. They offered no excuses, no appeals to morality. Their logic was mechanical. Negligent systems required correction, and each outcome was a product of human error interacting with predictable variables. Prosecutors built the case methodically. Engineers testified about pressure tolerances, gas concentrations, and water flow rates. Forensic specialists explained how small adjustments could produce lethal results. The regulator part from Marion became a centerpiece, a tangible link connecting the crimes across state lines. Families of the victims testified, their grief heavy, their voices demanding accountability. The courtrooms were tense. The towns, Larkspur Falls, Fairmont, Cedarbrook, Marion, listened in disbelief. Accidents, they had been told, were accidents. Now the machinery of law revealed intentionality. Rowan and Stan observed it all with remarkable composure. The prosecution's narrative of deliberate calculation, meticulous planning, and premeditation did not intimidate them. In their minds, they were still engineers, evaluating outcomes. Finchley's presence was noted, his analysis respected, but not feared. Every question, every cross-examination, every piece of evidence was absorbed and analyzed, stored in mental files. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The pattern was undeniable. 4 deaths, possibly more, all linked by professional knowledge, geographical distribution, and a logical consistency that could not be coincidental. They returned with verdicts of guilty on all counts. Rowan and Stan maintained composure, silent acknowledgments passing between them. The sentencing was stark. The judge described them as men who mistook arrogance for justice, engineers of death who manipulated systems and people alike with cruel precision. Rowan's expression did not change. Stan's jaw remained set. There was no outcry, no plea for mercy. The sentence, death by the state, each man in separate facilities. The media followed the trial avidly. Editorials debated morality versus technical reasoning, the nature of justice, and the responsibility of engineers when knowledge intersects with opportunity. Outside the courthouse, townspeople whispered about the deaths they had believed were accidents, now revealed as deliberate, meticulously planned corrections. Finchley observed the final proceedings quietly, satisfied yet wary. His work was not finished. The logistical chain, the motivations, the psychological patterns, these were now case studies. He knew that the methodical minds he had tracked were gone from the streets, but their pattern, their methodology, would influence thinking about forensic analysis, technical investigations, and predictive profiling for years to come. Rowan wrote a single note in his detention cell. "Your systems will fail again." Stan refused to write anything, smiling once, just once, at the irony of order and chaos intertwined. In the sterile, echoing cells, they were finally constrained by forces beyond mechanical logic, law, human oversight, and consequence. And outside, The world moved forward. Infrastructure was audited, boilers replaced, pipes checked. And yet, as always, human negligence and greed remained constants, ready to be corrected by forces as precise and as unseen as Rowan and Stan had once been. Part 10. Shutdown. The execution chamber in Ohio was quiet, sterile, and cold. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and polished metal. Rowan Pike sat calmly, his thin frame rigid in the chair. The guards moved with precise choreography, straps securing limbs, electrodes positioned. He did not flinch. He did not speak. In his mind, he was still tracing diagrams, calculating probabilities, running mental simulations of systems, machines and people alike, as he had always done. Stan Calder was taken to a separate chamber in Indiana, isolated from Rowan, but with the same meticulous procedure. He smiled once at the irony. Two men who had believed themselves architects of death, finally reduced to the inevitability of human law. Family members of the victims attended the hearings preceding the executions, their faces hardened by grief, their eyes seeking closure. Newspapers chronicled the events. Editorials debated morality, free will, and the interplay of knowledge with power. The deaths that had once been hidden as accidents were now a public record, meticulously documented, catalogued, and explained. Rowan's final words were brief, procedural, devoid of emotion. "Your infrastructure will fail again." Stan said nothing. Only the faintest twitch of a corner of his mouth betrayed the faintest acknowledgement of the situation. He understood the systems better than anyone, and yet even he could not correct this ultimate mechanism of control. Outside the walls of the prisons, towns returned to routine. Larkspur Falls replaced its boilers, inspected every pipe, and reassessed municipal infrastructure. Fairmont rebuilt the silo. Cedarbrook purged old water lines. Marion audited every gas line. Safety regulations were enforced, and vigilance increased. Yet human negligence, shortcuts, and oversight remained constants, ever present, unchanging. Years later, Finchley reflected on the cases. The analysis of Rowan and Stan had redefined his understanding of methodical criminal behavior. Their crimes were not motivated by passion, anger, or thrill. They were driven by the need to control, to correct, to impose order upon chaos. Their meticulousness, their precision, their detachment from morality made them uniquely dangerous. And yet, their downfall proved that no system, however well calculated, could remain unobserved forever. Rowan and Stan became cautionary examples in criminal psychology seminars, textbooks, and forensic workshops. The story of their corrections, a term that had once justified death in their minds, was taught as a case study in precision, calculation, and the inevitability of oversight. Somewhere, in towns like Larkspur Falls, Fairmont, Cedarbrook, and Marion, accidents continued to happen. Boilers malfunctioned, water lines corroded, grain silos ignited. Machines and systems remained imperfect, humans remained fallible. But for a brief period in history, two men had attempted to impose absolute order, to correct human error with lethal precision. They had succeeded, and yet ultimately they had failed. Not in calculation, but in underestimating observation, accountability, and the resilience of law. His work was not finished. The logistical chain, the motivations, the psychological patterns, these were now case studies. He knew that the methodical minds he had tracked were gone from the streets, but their pattern, their methodology, would influence thinking about forensic analysis, technical investigations, and predictive profiling for years to come. Rowan wrote a single note in his detention cell: "Your systems will fail again." Stan refused to write anything, smiling once, just once, at the irony of order and chaos intertwined. In the sterile, echoing cells, they were finally constrained by forces beyond mechanical logic: law, human oversight, and consequence. And outside, the world moved forward. Infrastructure was audited, boilers replaced, pipes checked, and yet, as always, human negligence and greed remained constants, ready to be corrected by forces as precise and as unseen as Rowan and Stan had once been. The final line in Rowan's notebook, discovered years later, summed up the philosophy that had guided them. Systems may be corrected, but the human element is eternal. Errors will return. The world moved on. Lives continued. Pipes aged. Boilers threatened. Dust accumulated. And somewhere in that inevitability, the legacy of Rowan Pike and Stan Calder remained, a reminder of the delicate balance between knowledge, power, and morality.